It began on a warm April evening, the kind where the air still clings to the scent of winter, but the light feels like hope. We were invited to a private birthday reception for Edward, a friend of ours, if you can call someone a friend when your relationship is built on polished dinners and polite smiles. Edward owns a chain of luxury car dealerships. He's the kind of man who toasts with rare scotch and tips with $100 bills folded like origami. The reception was held in a rented lakefront lounge, complete with a string quartet, a mirror-polished buffet, and floral centerpieces that probably cost more than my first car. Amber, my wife, looked like a magazine cover. I can't deny that. She wore a tight red dress, the kind that demands attention and gets it. Her hair was pulled into a high ponytail, her makeup flawless. She walked in with a sway that could stop conversation, and it did. Heads turned. Even I, after 15 years together, had to catch my breath. But that admiration, that stunned silence, it wasn't directed at us. It was at her. Just her. I'd always liked that she carried herself with confidence. But that night, it felt different. There was something sharpened about her energy, like she knew she was performing. She floated between conversations like a political candidate working the floor, smiling just the right amount, tilting her head with perfect timing. But it wasn't the charm that unnerved me. It was how easily she forgot I was there. The first time I noticed him, he was standing by the wine bar, laughing a little too comfortably, one hand gripping a glass, the other resting on Amber's lower back like it had been there 1,000 times before. Tall, square-jawed, expensive-looking in that rugged, I don't care, but I do kind of way. His name was Mark. Amber introduced him with one of those breezy lines, "Oh, Jake, this is Mark, an old college friend." Old friend. I knew most of her college crowd. We'd been together since her senior year. But I'd never heard this name. Never seen this face. Mark smiled at me and offered a firm handshake, the kind that says, "I know I'm winning something you're still trying to hold on to." He had those eyes, the ones that linger too long, the ones that calculate how much space they can steal without being called out. And Amber, she laughed at everything he said, even the dumb jokes, the kind she usually rolled her eyes at when I made them. It was the small things that piled up. The way he stood a little too close in photos. How he leaned in to whisper something while brushing her shoulder. And how she didn't flinch. Didn't even seem aware. As if his hand belonged there. As if they'd rehearsed this routine. I tried to stay composed. I made polite conversation. I even laughed when Mark made some joke about how Amber used to be the queen of late-night cramming and vending machine dinners. She giggled, swatting his arm like he was her favorite sitcom character. I watched it all from the edge of our shared life, wondering when I'd become the extra in my own marriage. She kept checking her phone. Typing fast. Glancing up at him. Smiling. I noticed she wasn't wearing her wedding ring. When I asked about it earlier that afternoon, she said it was at the jeweler's for resizing. Funny. She hadn't mentioned it before and it fit just fine last week. Still, I played along. Tried to convince myself I was imagining it, that I was tired, stressed, seeing ghosts in shadows. But then, halfway through the evening, I caught a glimpse of her phone screen as she held it loosely by her side. Mark's name. Right at the top of her messages. I walked over, quiet, calm. I asked, with a smile that probably looked more like a wince, who she was texting. She didn't even bother with eye contact. "Work stuff," she said, brushing me off like a fly. "Charity coordination. You wouldn't get it." When I lifted my hand to show her the name on the screen, she glanced at it and smirked. Not embarrassed. Not nervous. Just smug. "Are you really doing this again?" she said, loud enough for the people around us to hear. "God, Jake, if you're going to ruin every event with your jealousy, maybe you should just go home." I looked around. People were watching. Some turned away. Others didn't bother pretending. They leaned in, waiting for the spectacle. Then Amber did something I'll never forget. She turned to our group of friends, people we'd known for years, and raised her glass. "Sorry, everyone," she announced, eyes twinkling with venom. "Jake gets like this sometimes. He forgets the world doesn't revolve around him." They laughed. All of them. Laughed like it was some inside joke, like I was the punchline. Like I hadn't built a life with her, hadn't held her through 2 miscarriages and 1 screaming labor. Like I hadn't bought that red dress she was wearing. They laughed and I stood there like a monument to my own foolishness. I didn't say a word. I didn't yell. I didn't throw a drink or cause a scene. I just looked at her, really looked, and saw a stranger smiling back. A stranger who had worn my wife's face and name and promises. But not her soul. I turned and walked toward the exit. My heart wasn't racing, it was sinking. Deep. Into that place where disappointment lives after hope finally dies. But I didn't leave empty-handed. On the way out, I passed Edward, the birthday boy, our mutual friend. He was chatting with some executives, laughing about something irrelevant. I handed him a folded napkin. He raised an eyebrow. "Read it later," I said, then walked away. But he didn't read it later. He opened it right there. And in a drunk attempt to show off, he grabbed the microphone from the DJ, chuckled, and read the note aloud to the crowd. "If you hear her name again," he said, slurring slightly, "remember she hid 2 pregnancies from her husband. And one of them wasn't his." Silence. The kind that claws at your skin. That drops the temperature in a room by 10 degrees. That strips every mask off every face. Amber stood frozen, her glass halfway to her lips. And I kept walking. Out the door, across the gravel lot, to my car. I didn't look back. There was nothing behind me I wanted to see anymore. I didn't go home that night. I drove. No destination at first. Just forward, away from the lights, away from the music still echoing in my ears, and away from the image of Amber smirking while the room laughed at me. The only place that made sense was my brother's place in Westville, small town, 2 hours west, where the streets are lined with maple trees and nobody cares what car you drive or how many wine tastings you've attended. On the highway, the hum of the tires became a kind of white noise, and my thoughts started pouring in, uninvited. That's when the dam finally broke. All the little things I'd filed away under stress or work pressure or normal rough patches began flooding back in sharp detail. Things I had seen and chosen not to see. My mind, now clear of excuses, started rearranging those moments into something terrifyingly obvious. It hadn't started with Mark. It hadn't started that night. It started long before. 3 months earlier, Amber began staying late at the firm. Strategy meetings, she'd said. Client delays. Before that, she couldn't stand overtime. She was the first to complain when dinner was pushed past 7. Suddenly, she was working till 9. Then 10. Sometimes even past midnight. I tried to support her. I brought her takeout to the office once and she was furious, said I was treating her like a child, invading her space, embarrassing her in front of her colleagues. So I stopped trying. Then came the calendar lockout. We'd shared our digital calendars for years, a small habit that made family planning easier. I remember opening the app one morning and seeing an error message. I thought it was a glitch. But no. She'd removed my access. I asked her about it and she waved it off with a laugh, saying she was cleaning things up and that I didn't need to see every eyelash appointment. A week later, she changed the password to our shared email. She stopped answering my texts during the day, said she was trying to focus. Calls would go straight to voicemail. But then I'd see her scrolling Instagram and liking photos minutes after I'd left a message. When I mentioned it, she shrugged. "You're paranoid." And I believed her. God help me, I believed her. I told myself we were just in a rut. That she was stressed. That maybe I was too clingy, too old-fashioned. I mean, we were in our 40s now, marriages shift. That's normal, right? Not everything stays like the first 5 years. You stop finishing each other's sentences. You fall asleep without kissing. That's just time, right? But now I knew better. I remembered the night she stopped sleeping under the same blanket. Said she had insomnia. That I moved too much. That I breathed loudly. She started taking her pillow to the guest room. Sometimes she'd even fall asleep on the couch watching TED Talks. I'd wake up to find her gone, the TV screen still glowing with the home menu. Even James, our 10-year-old, had started asking questions. He once told me innocently, like a kid trying to help, that Mommy said not to come in when she's talking on the phone late at night. I asked what she was talking about and he just shrugged. I don't know. Grown-up stuff. But she laughed a lot. Like, weird laughing. I brushed it off. Kids misinterpret things. I told myself that. Then there was the day I found the earrings. A delicate pair of emerald studs sitting in the center console of Amber's car. Still in the box. With a small white card tucked beneath them that read, "You deserve to feel seen." No name. Just the message written in a casual, slanted script. Not her handwriting. I asked where they came from. She said her coworkers had chipped in for her birthday. Said the card was just some cheesy Hallmark joke someone wrote. But I checked, her birthday wasn't for another 3 weeks. I said nothing. I buried that memory like all the others. But in the car, driving under the black sky toward my brother's house, I unburied everything. I saw it all like a reel playing in reverse, the missed dinners, the sudden mood swings, the emotional distance that had spread like mold across the walls of our marriage. Amber had changed. Or maybe she'd been changing slowly and I'd refused to admit it. There was the spa retreat she took in January. For days, all-inclusive, no kids allowed. "It's a wellness thing with the girls," she'd said. I offered to drive her. She said no, she was carpooling with someone named Claire. But when I checked her story with Claire's husband afterward, he said Claire was in Arizona that whole week for a medical conference. I remember how cold my stomach felt that night. But instead of confronting Amber, I sat on the couch and stared at our wedding photo that sunny October afternoon, her in lace, me in a rented tux, both of us smiling like life was only going to get better. I wanted that version of us to be real. So I lied to myself. There were receipts too, little clues she left like breadcrumbs. A charge for a hotel room just 30 minutes from our house. Day use for a work meeting, she claimed. Another for an Uber ride from a high-rise downtown, a place where no client of hers lived. I asked about it once and she said, "Jake, are you seriously tracking me like some stalker?" I wasn't. Not then. But maybe I should have been. The final memory that hit me like a slap was the dinner party at the Grant's house. Amber had worn a silver dress. She spent the entire evening talking to a tall man in a navy blazer, someone I didn't recognize. When I tried to join their conversation, she glanced at me like I was interrupting a sacred ritual. Later that night, I asked who he was. She said, "Just an investor. You wouldn't understand the topic anyway." That was 6 weeks ago. And now that I thought back on it, that investor looked an awful lot like Mark. I arrived at my brother's place around midnight. He didn't ask questions. Just nodded toward the guest room and went back to his book. That's one of the reasons I love him. He waits until I'm ready. I lay on the unfamiliar mattress staring at the ceiling fan, listening to it click as it spun. The silence felt heavy but also honest. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay there remembering. Every shrug. Every unexplained receipt. Every canceled plan. Every time Amber said, "It's nothing," and I nodded like a fool. It had never been nothing. It had been right in front of me. And I had chosen blindness because the truth would have destroyed me. Or so I thought. Now I knew better. Now the truth was my only way forward. 3 days later, I returned home. Not to move back in, that chapter had already closed. I came only to grab a folder I needed for work, the one with tax documents and property records I'd need for the legal process. I waited until early morning when I figured Amber would either be asleep or gone. The idea of seeing her again, even for a moment, turned my stomach. But I told myself it would be a quick in and out. No words. No drama. Just business. It was 6:20 a.m. when I pulled into the driveway. Amber's car was already there, parked slightly crooked, like she'd come home in a hurry and didn't care how it looked. I sat in the car for a minute, gripping the steering wheel. I thought about calling first. Then I thought about turning around. But I didn't. I'd spent enough time running from things. Now it was time to face whatever was waiting. The house was quiet when I stepped in, eerily so. The air felt stale, as if it hadn't been breathed by anyone who cared. I walked through the living room, past the scattered mail on the table, the empty wine glass by the couch, the faint smell of her perfume that still clung to the walls like a lie. My steps were soft. Automatic. I didn't want to disturb anyone. I just wanted the folder from the upstairs office drawer and to disappear before anything broke again. But then I saw them, a pair of sneakers by the hallway bench. Not mine. Men's size 11, gray with neon orange soles. The kind that doesn't come cheap. I stared at them for a moment, waiting for logic to save me. A cousin visiting. A coworker in trouble. Anything. But the door to our bedroom upstairs was slightly ajar, and logic died right there. From behind the cracked door, I heard a low murmur, a man's voice, unmistakable, followed by Amber's morning laugh. That throaty, sleepy kind of laugh she used to make when we lay under the covers on Sunday mornings when the world hadn't gotten to us yet. Hearing it now, wrapped in someone else's presence, hit me harder than any scream. I didn't plan to look. I told myself to turn around, to leave with some dignity. But my legs moved on their own. I pushed the door open slowly, just a few inches more. There they were. Amber, lying in bed completely naked, the blanket lazily covering only part of her. And Mark, the same man from Edward's party. Shirtless, sipping coffee from one of our mugs. My mug. The blue ceramic one James had painted for Father's Day 3 years ago. He was holding it like he belonged there. Like this wasn't a secret anymore. Amber saw me first. She didn't scream. She didn't cover herself or reach for excuses. She just looked at me, head tilted slightly, and said with flat calmness, "You're early." I didn't answer. I didn't ask questions. What was left to ask? Every suspicion had now transformed into fact. Every lie she told had finally taken shape. It wasn't just an affair, it was a replacement. A substitution. She hadn't slipped. She had jumped. I backed out of the room, shutting the door quietly behind me. I didn't want a confrontation. I didn't want explanations that would only deepen the wound. I walked back down the stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. My hand brushed the railing, the one I installed myself during the remodel. My fingers lingered there for a moment before letting go. In the kitchen, I found the folder I'd come for sitting under a stack of junk mail. I took it and I left. No slamming doors. No dramatic exits. Just quiet. But something had shifted. The weight of ambiguity was gone. The haze that had clouded my days, my thoughts, my self-respect, it was lifted now. The truth was ugly, yes. But it was solid. I could work with truth. You can't rebuild from suspicion. But you can rebuild from ruin. As I drove back to Westville, I couldn't shake the image of Mark in our bed, using my mug like it was a trophy. It wasn't just infidelity. It was trespassing. A violation of everything I had built and trusted and sacrificed for. This man hadn't just slipped into Amber's life. He had moved into mine. And Amber, her expression still haunted me. No guilt. No apology. Just mild annoyance, like I'd interrupted her hair appointment. That coldness told me everything I needed to know. She had already detached. Emotionally, psychologically, she had exited our marriage long before her body did. I had simply been the last to leave the building. That evening, my brother and I sat on his porch. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. He handed me a beer and we watched the wind stir the trees across the lawn. The world felt calmer now, even in its brokenness. There was something strangely comforting in knowing the full extent of the damage. No more guessing. No more pretending. But beneath the quiet, something darker was rising. Anger. Not the explosive kind, not yelling or fists through walls. This was colder. Cleaner. Strategic. The kind of anger that narrows your focus, sharpens your decisions. I wasn't going to retaliate in the ways people expected. No revenge affairs. No slandering Amber to neighbors or torching her clothes in the driveway. I would be precise. I would take back control of my son's future, of my name, of the story Amber had twisted until I couldn't recognize myself in it anymore. I wasn't going to let her narrative become the official version. The next morning I made calls. I didn't sleep the night before. I spent it researching attorneys, reviewing custody laws, documenting everything I could remember. I compiled a timeline, **TS, old receipts. Anything that pointed to infidelity, emotional abuse, financial misconduct. It was messy, but it was a start. I reached out to Julian Hart, a divorce attorney known for his attention to detail and ruthless efficiency. He was expensive. But I didn't care. I wasn't playing defense anymore. Then I called a private analyst, someone who specialized in digital forensics. I wanted every thread of Amber's digital life examined. Messages. Accounts. Transactions. I gave him full access. Within 24 hours, he started sending results. But that part, the unraveling, the strategy, the counterstrike, would come later. For now, all I had was the image of Amber's eyes, blank with indifference, and the echo of her voice in our bedroom saying those two words with terrifying calm. "You're early." By the next morning, the fog of shock had burned off. I wasn't grieving anymore. I wasn't questioning. I was preparing. I woke up in the guest room of my brother's house with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The weight of denial was gone. What remained was purpose, sharp, cold, and focused. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and began listing everything I would need to dismantle the life Amber had built on lies. I started with James. Our son was 10, bright, sensitive, and already too observant for his own good. He'd asked questions I hadn't known how to answer. Why Mom didn't tuck him in anymore, why she always seemed busy, why she whispered on the phone after dark. I had tried to shield him, hoping things would return to normal. But now I knew protecting him didn't mean pretending everything was fine. It meant removing him from the fire before the whole house burned down. I spoke to my brother over breakfast. He didn't flinch when I asked if James could stay with him for a while. He just nodded and said, "Whatever you need." I knew James would be safe there. My brother's home was quiet, stable, everything ours hadn't been in months. I told Amber nothing. I simply drove to the house while she was out, picked James up from school, and took him to Westville. He thought we were just visiting Uncle Nate for a few days. I didn't correct him. Not yet. Then I called Julian Hart. He'd been recommended by a friend who'd gone through a brutal divorce 2 years earlier. Julian answered on the third ring. His voice was calm, surgical. I gave him a brief overview: affair, potential cohabitation, child involved, suspicious finances. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Let's meet. Bring everything." By evening, I was sitting in his office, a modern space in a quiet downtown building with frosted glass doors and dark wood furniture. I handed over every piece of documentation I had, **TS of messages, receipts, timestamped photos, and a list of Amber's odd behavior over the last year. He reviewed it all in silence, nodding slowly. "She's not just cheating," he said finally. "She's constructing a parallel life. These men, Mark, possibly others, they're not accidents. She's compartmentalizing." I nodded. She's hiding money too. I'm sure of it. He leaned back. Then we bring in a forensic analyst. I'll handle the filings. First step, emergency custody. You already have the child. That helps. We'll act fast before she realizes how serious this is. Within 24 hours, he filed for divorce on my behalf and submitted an emergency motion for temporary full custody of James. That same day, I got a call from the digital forensics consultant I'd hired. His name was Rowan, and his voice held the kind of calm that only comes from spending too much time uncovering human ugliness. He had already *n scraping Amber's email, cloud backups, and old chat archives. Some things were encrypted, but she wasn't cautious enough. Within hours, he uncovered multiple conversations with Mark, some romantic, some explicit, and all damning. But that wasn't the worst of it. There were 2 more names. Alex and Roman. One of them had wired her money for cosmetic procedures. Another paid monthly rent for a loft apartment on the east side of the city, an address I had never heard before. In messages, she referred to her time there as coaching sessions or professional retreats. But the tone of the conversations left no doubt these were not clients. They were benefactors. And Amber was selling something far more personal than advice. Rowan organized the messages into a timeline, cross-referenced with calendar events, Uber receipts, and voice memos. In one, she had recorded herself saying, "Jake's clueless. Still thinks I'm overworked. I'm pretending for James, but I can't stand coming home to that house." I stared at the transcript. Pretending for James. That's how she framed her motherhood. A performance. A role she wore like makeup, then wiped off as soon as the curtain closed. She had destroyed her marriage, lied to her son, drained our accounts, and left me standing in the ruins like an idiot who still believed in family. Not anymore. With Julian's help, we prepared a full legal assault, infidelity, financial misconduct, emotional neglect, hidden assets. I kept James out of school for 2 days, claiming a short vacation. I didn't want Amber using his location to make a scene before the court date. He played with his cousins, read adventure books, and never once asked why his mother hadn't called. Because she hadn't. Not once. It was as if, after I caught her, she'd simply hit the delete button on our family. I guess she assumed I'd do the same, retreat quietly, lick my wounds, and eventually move on while she built a new life on top of the ashes. But she underestimated me. She didn't know how long I'd tolerated things. How much I'd swallowed for the sake of peace. What she'd taken for weakness had never been cowardice, it was restraint. And now, with that restraint gone, I was dangerous. I spoke to the school principal and filed a formal update to James's emergency contacts. Amber was temporarily removed. I filed a police report listing her financial activity as suspicious, especially the unauthorized withdrawals from James's savings account, nearly $90,000 gone. All spent on seminars, rent, travel, gifts. Julian reached out to the bank with a request for flagged transaction history. The account had been opened when James was born, a symbolic fund for his future education. Amber had access and she drained it methodically over the past 2 years. There were charges from designer boutiques, private salons, luxury apartment complexes. She'd used our son's future as currency for her double life. In one particularly revealing email, she wrote to Roman, "It's not about the money. It's about the escape." With Jake, I always felt caged. I stared at that line for a long time. Caged? As if being loved, housed, supported, and trusted were shackles. As if stability was a prison. Amber had rewritten our entire story, in her head, to her lovers, maybe even to herself. And now it was time to stop her from rewriting James's future too. The court date was set. Temporary custody hearing. Julian warned me it might get ugly. That Amber would paint herself as the wounded wife, the misunderstood woman, the free spirit oppressed by a controlling man. "Don't react," he said. "Let the facts speak louder than her performance." I spent the night before the hearing lying awake on my brother's couch, watching James sleep in the next room. I studied his small frame, the way he clutched his blanket. I thought about the stories I used to tell him, about bravery, about truth, about how good always wins. Now I had to prove it. Not to Amber. To him. The hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. at the county courthouse, a beige government building that looked more like a DMV than the place where the future of my son's life would be decided. I arrived early in a gray suit that didn't quite fit anymore. I'd lost weight over the last few months. Stress has a way of shrinking you, not just in body, but in silence. Still, I felt tall that morning. Not confident, not yet, but steady. And steady was enough. Julian met me on the steps. He looked sharp, unfazed, sipping from a black thermos like it was just another Tuesday. "We going hard," he said. "She'll try to play soft. Don't react. Let the evidence burn through her lies. Amber arrived at 8:56. I recognized the sound of her heels before I turned to see her. White pantsuit. Loose curls. Light makeup that suggested motherly, not glamorous. She walked with the kind of poise you only rehearse in front of a mirror. Her expression was calm, almost bored, like this was beneath her. Then she saw me and for a fraction of a second her mouth twitched. Not in fear. In calculation. She adjusted her stride, slowed down, and placed a hand on her chest like she was steadying her heart for war. We didn't exchange a word. The courtroom was half empty. Just a few clerks, a bailiff, the judge, and the echo of everything unsaid. The judge was a woman in her 50s, stern and alert, with reading glasses perched low and a voice that cut through pleasantries. After routine formalities, she asked Amber to speak first. Amber stood up with rehearsed hesitation. "Your Honor, I'm here as a mother," she began. Her voice was gentle, almost trembling. "I've spent the last 10 years raising our son while managing work and surviving emotional pressure at home." She paused, eyes glistening. "My husband has military trauma. He's struggled with control. With anger. I don't blame him, but it's created a volatile environment, one I've tried to shield James from." I stared at her, emotionless. I knew that version of me didn't exist. But to strangers, her lie could stick. Her words hung in the air like smoke, pretty at first glance, but choking if inhaled. Julian rose calmly. "Your Honor," he said, "we'll allow the court to decide what environment is volatile after reviewing evidence." Then he began the presentation. First, he placed a thick folder on the table. "Exhibits A through R," he said. "Screensh *TS of communication between the respondent and 3 extramarital partners. Mark Carrington, Roman Nivens, and Alex Bauer. The contents are explicit and confirm cohabitation, financial exchange, and emotional abandonment." Amber flinched slightly. Just once. Then came the photos: Amber with Mark at the lake house, Amber entering the loft paid for by Roman, Amber kissing Alex outside a private spa. All time-stamped. All damning. Julian continued without flinching. "We also have financial records. Withdrawals totaling $87,400 from a joint account established for the child's education. Funds spent on personal cosmetic treatments, hotel bookings under aliases, and unauthorized apartment rentals. These are not business expenses. These are calculated diversions." Amber shifted in her seat. She kept her jaw tight, but her eyes darted toward the exit for half a second. That was the first real crack. Julian pressed on. He submitted messages between Amber and her so-called coaching clients where she discussed escaping domestic obligations, joked about leaving James with sitters, and claimed she had mastered the art of pretending. The judge leaned forward. "Is this your writing, Mrs. Lawson?" Amber stood, adjusting her jacket. "These were taken out of context," she said. "I was venting. We all have bad days." Julian handed over school records next. Days James was absent. Days he was signed out by Amber, and where the GPS pings placed her in hotel parking lots, not pediatric offices. Then came the audio files. Amber had used voice-to-text memos often, lazy with her storage habits. We played 2 short clips. Clip 1, Roman's money hit today. Finally. I need a break from Jake's moping and James's questions. Clip 2, this mom thing is exhausting. I need someone to take over for a few weeks. Maybe longer. The judge raised her hand, stopping the playback. "Enough," she said. Her voice had hardened. Julian nodded and sat. Amber stood again, breath sharp. "None of this proves I'm a bad mother. I made mistakes, but Jake is manipulating everything. He's always been like this, calculated. I'm not perfect, but I love my son." The judge didn't blink. "And you took your son to hotels, left him with staff while you went upstairs?" Amber stammered. Those were work things." Stop," the judge said. "I don't need to hear more." Amber's face tightened. Her jaw clenched, and then she snapped. "This is a setup. He's making me look like a monster." The judge simply picked up her pen. "For the record," she said, "the child is to remain in the custody of the petitioner, Mr. Lawson, effective immediately. Respondent will undergo a full psychological evaluation before the court revisits visitation. Temporary restraining parameters are enacted regarding financial accounts pending forensic audit." Amber gasped. She turned to me, mouth open, reaching for a sentence she couldn't find. And then she broke. "You ruined me," she shouted. "You planned this. You twisted everything I said." The bailiff took a step forward. Amber backed away, breathing fast. The judge continued, unfazed. "Court is adjourned." And that was it. 40 minutes and a decade unraveled in a courtroom that smelled faintly of dust and disappointment. Outside, the sky had turned gray. Amber stormed out before I even left my seat. She didn't look back. I didn't follow. Julian patted my shoulder and said that was clean. Rarely this clean. But it didn't feel clean. It felt sad. Heavy. Like I just buried something sacred and rotted all at once. Still, when I called James from the parking lot and told him I'd be home in an hour, he said, "Can we paint stars on my ceiling tonight?" I smiled. Yes, I said. Absolutely. I should have known she wouldn't go quietly. A week after the custody hearing, I received a call from my veteran service officer. His voice was tense, clipped. "Jake, we received a formal complaint. Anonymous but detailed. Allegations of aggression, verbal abuse, even implied threats toward your son." I didn't even have to ask. I knew it was Amber. She was trying to destroy the last thing I had left, my name. I submitted everything, court documents, custody rulings, psychological evaluations that had already cleared me. I provided statements from my brother, my neighbors, even James's school counselor. The complaint collapsed under the weight of the truth. But it still shook me. Not because I feared the lies, but because she was willing to torch everything just to wound me. At the same time, we received a finalized report from the forensic accountant Julian had hired. It was worse than expected. Amber hadn't just spent James's college fund, she had rerouted over $40,000 from a dormant investment account we'd agreed never to touch. She listed it as consulting expenses, but every charge told a different story: designer luggage, private wellness retreats, expensive gifts to her so-called clients. It wasn't just immoral. It was criminal. Julian moved to freeze her remaining assets and filed a separate claim for financial abuse. We prepared evidence for possible criminal charges. She went silent for 2 days. Then came the collapse. It was past midnight when I heard banging on my front gate. When I looked outside, I saw her barefoot, hair a mess, a half-empty wine bottle dangling from one hand. She screamed something I couldn't even make out. My porch lights lit her up like a stage. The neighbors watched from their windows as I called the police. When they arrived, she tried to argue. Then she cried. Then she laughed. They took her away in handcuffs. James slept through the night for the first time in months. 2 weeks later, the papers arrived. Official, notarized, final. Amber waived all claims to the house, to custody, to joint assets. Whether it was guilt, exhaustion, or a deal made by her attorney to avoid further charges, I never found out. All I knew was it was over. No more games. No more phone calls. Just silence. I moved with James to a small house on the edge of town. Quiet neighborhood. No whispers, no history. We painted his room green and stuck glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Every night, he'd lie beneath them and ask, "Do you think Mommy still remembers me?" And I'd answer, "That's not our story anymore." He stopped asking after a while. I didn't chase new love. I didn't go looking for anyone to fill the space she left. I filled it myself, with time, with presence, with learning to breathe in the quiet. Sometimes I'd find old photos tucked in drawers. A wedding frame. A birthday card with Amber's handwriting. I didn't rip them up. I didn't need to. I just closed the drawer and walked away. She tried to break everything I built. But all she really did was set me free. I survived. And I built a new home out of the stones she threw at me.